Story number 1.
It was supposed to be a celebration, a casual get-together to break in my best friend Kayla's new house. She'd just moved into a fixer-upper out in a semi-rural part of town, a place called Hollow Creek that didn't show up properly on Google Maps, but the house was cheap and spacious. Old, sure, but charming in that needs some work kind of way. We were all in our 20s, like none of us had money. So it made sense. A house like that, even if it needed updates, was still a step up from cramped apartments or still living with parents. The party started like any other. A group of 15 or so people showed up. Most of us, longtime friends or friends of friends. The house had this oddly large living room with a brick fireplace that hadn't been used in years, and a wraparound porch that creaked when you walked on it. The floorboards inside did the same, but we didn't mind that. The place had personality. No one wanted bland drywall and LED strips anyway. Kayla was excited, and her energy was infectious. She told us she planned to renovate a bit at a time, said her uncle had helped her with some of the basics, like plumbing and getting the electricity up to code. Her uncle had actually been the one who sold her the house. It had been in the family for decades. Kayla said her grandparents lived there when they were younger, though the house had sat empty for nearly 10 years before she bought it. The house was freezing when we arrived. It was mid-October, and even though we had heaters going, there was a chill that lingered in certain rooms, especially the hallway that led to the back of the house, past the kitchen and down toward the old cellar door. It wasn't even a basement, really, just a crawl space with a trapdoor Kayla hadn't managed to open yet. She made jokes about it, said it was probably full of raccoons or some old junk, but when she told us her dog refused to go anywhere near it, even the joke felt off. She had a retriever named Max, sweet, dumb, always wagging his tail, but when we got there that night, he stayed curled on the couch, growling low anytime someone got within 10 feet of that hallway. We didn't pay much attention. Every party has its weird moments. The music played, the drinks flowed, and conversation buzzed like background static. Around 10:30, someone, Steph, I think, brought out a game of truth or dare. We were too old for it, technically, but everyone was drunk enough to play along. The dares started small. Run outside barefoot, prank call an ex, shotgun a beer. Then it escalated. Someone dared Kyle to go into the dark hallway and knock on the cellar door. He laughed it off, grabbed a flashlight, and strutted down the hall like he was performing on a stage. He disappeared into the darkness, and for a few seconds we heard nothing. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. Followed by silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting for him to come back and say something smart. But he didn't. Not for at least 5 minutes. When he finally reappeared, he looked off, pale, sweaty, like he'd seen something he didn't want to talk about. We asked him what happened. He shook his head. "Don't go back there," he said. "Just don't." It killed the vibe a little, sure, but we moved on. Some people started to leave. Others settled into couches or floor cushions, chatting or half watching a horror movie playing on mute in the background. The night crawled forward. Around midnight, the lights started to flicker. We assumed it was the wiring. It was an old house, after all. But then the music stopped, not paused, not turned off, just stopped. The Bluetooth speaker blinked like it had lost connection, even though the phone was still paired. At the same time, Max, Kayla's dog, lifted his head and started barking toward the hallway. Not a casual bark. It was frantic, desperate. He ran to the edge of the living room, planted his feet, and growled like he was facing down an intruder. Kayla tried to calm him down, but the dog wouldn't move. He kept his eyes on the hallway, trembling slightly. That's when I noticed something. Everyone else did too. The hallway, it was darker than it should have been. The light bulb above it was still working, but the space past the kitchen looked almost pitch black, like it was swallowing light. I don't mean it looked dim. I mean it looked wrong. And then we heard the footsteps. Not ours, not the dog's, coming from the hall. Slow, dragging, like someone was limping or pulling something heavy behind them. A few of us called out. Kayla grabbed a baseball bat from behind the door. We thought maybe someone had broken in, but no one answered. Nate and 2 others walked toward the hall, their phone flashlights cutting through the dark. I stayed back with Kayla and the rest. They got about halfway down the hall when the lights completely died. the entire house plunged into blackness, and that's when we heard Nate scream. I've known Nate since we were kids. I've seen him get hit by a car on his skateboard and barely flinch. I've never heard him scream like that. We rushed after him, our lights flicked back on by themselves, just like that, as if someone flipped the breaker. And when we got to the end of the hall, we found him curled up against the cellar door, sobbing into his hands. He wouldn't tell us what he saw. Just kept whispering, "Don't open it. Don't open it. Don't open it," over and over again. We carried him out. I stayed with him while someone else called a friend to come pick him up. He left without saying goodbye. That should have been enough. We should have all left then. But it's strange what you tell yourself when you don't want to believe something is really happening. Maybe he had a panic attack. Maybe he drank too much. Maybe it was a prank. We all wanted to believe it was something explainable. Kayla went to bed not long after. The rest of us crashed in the living room, wrapped in blankets, trying to act like we weren't shaken. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was faint at first. I thought it was Max, maybe trying to get into a room. But when I opened my eyes, I saw him sitting by the fireplace, ears perked. He wasn't scratching. The sound was coming from beneath us, directly under the floorboards. Slow, scraping sounds like someone running their nails across wood. I froze, holding my breath. The others were still asleep, or pretending to be. Max growled again, and that's when the noise stopped. I thought I imagined it. I really did. Until Kayla came downstairs 10 minutes later, pale and shaking, holding her phone. "There's something under the house," she said. I heard it too. It knocked on the floor under my bed. We sat up, all of us. No one was sleeping anymore. We huddled together until morning. When the sun came up, we checked the crawl space. The trapdoor in the hallway wasn't stuck anymore. It opened easily, like it had never been jammed. There was a ladder leading down into a dirt crawl space. Cold air blew up from below. We didn't go in. We just looked. There were drag marks in the dirt. Long ones. Like something had been moving around. Something heavy. We called Kayla's uncle, told him about the noises, the lights, everything. He was silent for a long time, then said, "That house was never supposed to be sold. I thought it was better if I didn't say anything, but your grandfather didn't die in a hospital like we told you. He died in that house. He wasn't well near the end." Kayla didn't ask what he meant by not well. I don't think she wanted to know. She moved out a week later, sold everything she had and left the city. The house has been empty ever since. People still say they see lights on in the windows, hear music late at night, but no one lives there, and no one's dared to throw another party. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I was 23, living in a small apartment in the city, not far from where I grew up. My social life at the time was a bit all over the place, but I had a small group of friends I could rely on. They weren't the most stable group. There were people coming and going, relationships that seemed to start and end every week. But at the time, I felt grounded. Then one of my friends, Karen, invited me to a party. I wasn't keen on the idea. Karen had recently moved into a new house, one she had bought after finally managing to escape her parents' place, and she was throwing a housewarming party. I hadn't been to a house party in ages, but she kept pushing, texting me every day leading up to the event. At first, I turned her down, but the last message she sent me before the party was different. She said, "Please come. You need to see this place. You'll love it." Maybe it was the exhaustion from my own day-to-day life or the need to get out, but something about her message convinced me. I hadn't seen Karen much recently, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said I'd go. The house was in an older part of town. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. As I drove up, I couldn't help but notice that the houses around Karen's looked as if they were abandoned. Some of them had boarded up windows, others looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The street was dim, with only a few streetlights casting weak pools of yellow light on the pavement. When I arrived at Karen's house, I hesitated before stepping out of the car. The house itself was large, almost too large for one person. It was an old Victorian-style building, 3 stories tall with a wide front porch, but there was something off about it. The porch was cracked, and the front door, though painted a deep shade of green, looked like it hadn't been opened in a while. Still, I shrugged it off. I wasn't there to inspect the place. I was there to have fun, right? Karen greeted me at the door, looking far more excited than I had seen her in a long time. Her hair was done, makeup flawless, and she looked like she had put a lot of effort into making the house feel like a home. Come in, come in. I'm so glad you made it, she said, pulling me inside before I had a chance to look around. The inside of the house was just as grand as the outside. The floors creaked beneath our feet. The high ceilings made the space feel vast, and the old furniture gave the house an air of mystery. It was like stepping into a place that had lived several different lives. Antique pieces mixed with modern decorations, but in a way that felt forced. It didn't seem like Karen's style, but maybe that was part of the charm. She had gone out of her way to make the place look like something out of a magazine. Grab a drink, meet some people, she said, handing me a cup before I even realized what was going on. I'll be right back, just need to check on a few things. I wandered into the living room, taking in the scene. People were scattered around the space, drinking, chatting, laughing. It felt like your typical house party, only the atmosphere was a bit heavier. The air felt thick, as though it was pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off and make small talk with a few people, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. There was a strange energy in the house, and it felt like we were all intruders. Karen was nowhere to be seen, so I decided to explore the house a bit. I wandered through the rooms, taking in the oddities. The place had an eerie charm, but it was hard to shake the feeling of discomfort. The walls were adorned with old paintings, the faces of strangers staring down at me as I moved through the halls. Some of the rooms had a strange stillness, the furniture looking out of place, and some pieces were even covered in dusty sheets, as if they were from another era. As I walked through the upstairs hall, I came across a door at the far end, slightly ajar. It looked like it led to a bed, but the closer I got to a bedroom, the colder it became. The temperature dropped so suddenly that it took me by surprise. I pushed the door open. Inside was an old, musty room. The bed was covered in heavy, faded sheets, and the furniture was antique. The window was half open, letting in the chill of the evening air. But it wasn't the room that caught my attention. It was the mirror on the far wall. I couldn't explain it at first. There was something about the mirror. It was large, ornate, and positioned in such a way that it seemed to command the room. As I looked into it, I felt my stomach turn. The reflection was strange. There was something off about it. The room in the mirror didn't look like the one I was standing in. It seemed dimmer, and there was a figure standing in the corner, someone I couldn't make out clearly. I shook my head, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It had to be the lighting, but when I blinked, the figure in the mirror was gone. "Hey, you okay?" I jumped, startled by Karen's voice behind me. I turned around to see her standing in the doorway, her face drawn in concern. "Yeah, just exploring," I said, trying to brush off the unease I was feeling. "What's up with this room?" She stepped in, glancing around before her eyes settled on the mirror. A shadow crossed her face. "That's the master bedroom," she said. "I don't use it. Too much history." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press, but something in the way she said it unsettled me further. She seemed to be avoiding the topic, like she didn't want to talk about it. "Well, let's head back down. People are asking about you," she said, motioning toward the door. I followed her down the stairs, but the feeling of unease lingered. As we re-entered the living room, I noticed that the atmosphere had shifted. People were starting to act strange. Some of them were standing still, staring at nothing, while others were laughing too loudly, as if trying to fill a silence that wasn't there. It felt like the house had swallowed the energy from the room, leaving only a lingering emptiness. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw a man standing by the front window. He was tall, wearing an old-fashioned suit, his hair slicked back. I felt a sudden wave of discomfort rush over me. He didn't belong here. He was out of place. I turned to Karen. "Who's the guy by the window?" I asked. Karen's face went pale, and she quickly grabbed my arm. "Don't talk to him. Don't acknowledge him," she whispered urgently. I was taken aback. "What do you mean? Who is he?" But before she could answer, the man was gone. Vanished, like he had never been there at all. Karen looked shaken, her eyes wide. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. Everyone, just leave. I didn't need to be told twice. The party had devolved into chaos, people scrambling for their coats and bags, trying to get out of the house as fast as possible. No one said a word as we made our way out the door. The strange man was no longer in the window, their fright, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching us, his eyes following our every movement. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, the atmosphere shifted again. The oppressive weight of the house lifted, and I could finally breathe. The party was over. "I'm so sorry," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know." I was too stunned to ask her what she meant. The entire night felt like a blur, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back inside that house. Later, Karen told me that she had found out something strange about the house after moving in. It had belonged to a wealthy family many years ago, but the stories about the house weren't pleasant. People spoke of a dark history, of loss, tragedy, and unexplainable occurrences. Karen never believed it at first, thinking it was just superstition. But after the party, after everything that happened, she wasn't so sure anymore. She left the house a month later, never stepping foot in it again. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was all in our heads. Maybe it wasn't, but I do know this. Some places are better left undisturbed, their histories better left forgotten. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be a casual get-together, just a house party to celebrate Aaron moving into his first real place, an old 2-story colonial he'd managed to rent for dirt cheap in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Bloomington. The kind of place that looked charming from the outside. Red brick, white trim, a wraparound porch with a wooden swing creaking gently in the wind. But once you stepped inside, you could tell it had history. Not necessarily the good kind. The floors groaned with every step, and the air always felt just a little too still. But Aaron didn't care. It was affordable, roomy, and best of all, perfect for parties. He invited everyone he knew, coworkers, old high school friends, people from the community college he used to attend, and a few neighbors to keep things friendly. No flyers, no social media invites, just word of mouth. The plan was to keep it small, maybe 20 people, tops. Bring your own booze, no crazy music after midnight, stay out of the basement. Aaron said that last part almost as a joke. "Seriously," he warned a group in the kitchen during the party setup, "the landlord told me the basement stairs are kind of busted, said not to use it till he gets it looked at." In truth, he hadn't even opened the basement door yet. He'd only moved in a few days prior, and there was something about that door at the end of the hall that made him feel off, like it didn't belong there, like it had been added later, sealed behind layers of paint to blend into the rest of the hallway. By 9 p.m., the party was in full swing. Music pulsed from a Bluetooth speaker on the mantel. People were laughing, drinking, sprawled out on worn couches, or hovering around the kitchen island like moths to a flame. There was an energy in the air, a kind of jittery excitement that came from being in a strange house, in a strange part of town, doing what you weren't supposed to do. Around 10:30, a guy named Zach, one of Aaron's friends from college, showed up with a couple people Aaron didn't recognize. One of them was a girl named Lena. Tall, quiet, with long dark hair and pale skin that looked almost bluish in the dim lighting. She hardly said a word when Aaron greeted her, just smiled and walked inside like she already knew the place. Nobody really noticed her after that. She drifted from room to room, not speaking, not drinking, always staring. Someone even made a joke about it later, saying she must have been tripping on something. By midnight, the group had grown. More people arrived than expected. Someone texted someone else, and suddenly there were strangers drinking in the kitchen and unfamiliar faces crashing on the porch swing. That's when the first weird thing happened. A girl named Jess went to use the bathroom upstairs and didn't come down for over 20 minutes. When someone finally went to check on her, she was just standing in front of the mirror, hands gripping the sink, staring at her own reflection. "Jess?" her friend Kendra had asked, nudging the door open. "You okay?" Jess didn't answer, just kept staring. Kendra stepped inside, gently touched her shoulder, and Jess suddenly snapped out of it, gasped, looked around like she'd forgotten where she was. "There was someone else in the mirror," she whispered. "She was standing right behind me." Kendra laughed nervously. Girl, you're drunk. But Jess swore up and down she hadn't had more than a drink or two. The story made the rounds downstairs. Everyone kind of laughed it off, but you could feel the mood shifting, like something had deflated. The music was still playing, but quieter. People started glancing over their shoulders. A few couples said their goodbyes. Then came the banging. It came from the basement door. Loud. 3 hard knocks, like someone slamming their fists from the other side. The music stopped. Conversation froze. All eyes turned toward the hallway where the door stood closed, perfectly still. Someone laughed nervously. That you, Aaron? He shook his head. Nobody's down there. I told everyone to stay out. Zach walked over, trying to lighten the mood. All right, who's playing around? He grabbed the doorknob, twisted it, and it was locked. Dude, why is it locked from this side? He asked. I didn't lock it, Aaron said. Zach knocked once, playfully. Hello? Anyone down there? Silence. He leaned closer. That's when everyone saw the doorknob slowly begin to turn on its own, back and forth, like someone was fiddling with it from the other side. Zach jumped back. Nope. 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 More people left after that. It wasn't funny anymore. Aaron, trying to save face, said the house was probably settling, or maybe the wind had loosened something. But no one believed that. Not after what they saw. By 1 a.m., only a handful of people remained. Aaron, Zach, Kendra, Jess, and 2 others who had passed out in the living room. They sat together in the kitchen, drinking in silence, glancing toward the dark hallway every few minutes. That's when Lena reappeared. No one had seen her for over an hour. She walked in from the hallway like she'd just come up from the basement, though the door hadn't opened. Her hair was wet. What the hell? Aaron asked. Where were you? She didn't answer, just smiled, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. Her eyes were darker now. Not just her pupils, everything, like the color had drained from them. Jess stood up fast. She's the one I saw. In the mirror. Lena tilted her head. Then, without a word, she turned and walked into the living room. When they followed her, she was gone. Gone. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. There was no way she could have left. They searched the house top to bottom, even opened the basement door. It was dark. Too dark. The flashlight on Aaron's phone barely pierced the blackness. It wasn't just unlit, it felt thick, like fog or smoke, pressing back against the light. They didn't go down. Instead, they shut the door and pushed a chair in front of it. Aaron tried to act like it was nothing, but inside, he was spiraling. He hadn't told anyone the truth, that the night before he moved in, he found an old photo buried in one of the upstairs closets. It showed a family of 4, 2 kids, a smiling father, and a woman standing stiffly with her hands at her sides. Her eyes were scratched out. On the back, someone had written in faded ink, "She won't stay buried." He'd thrown the photo out, thinking it was just some prank left by the last tenant. Now he wasn't so sure. Around 2 a.m., Kendra screamed. They rushed to the bathroom where she was pointing at the mirror. There, on the fogged-up glass, were words written in reverse. "Let me up!" Nobody had been in the bathroom for over an hour. There was no steam, no reason for condensation. That's when Jess started crying. "She's trying to get out," she said, trembling. "She's still down there." Aaron didn't want to admit it, but he believed her. The basement felt like it was breathing. They decided to leave. Everyone, even the 2 people sleeping, were dragged out of their half-drunken stupors and herded toward the front door. But it wouldn't open. Aaron turned the lock, twisted the knob, shoved with his shoulder. Nothing. He tried the back door. Also jammed. "Windows," Zach said. They went to the living room, started prying at the windows. They wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped, their breath started to fog, and then the lights went out. Pitch black. Someone started whispering, not from the group, from inside the walls. Faint, like wind, but unmistakably words. "She's coming up." Then a loud thud from the basement door, followed by another, then the sound of footsteps. Not running, climbing. 1 step at a time. Aaron grabbed a fireplace poker from the mantel. If something comes through that door, but the door didn't open. Instead, the banging stopped. Everything went silent again. They waited. Seconds turned into minutes. Then slowly the lights flickered back on. The house was empty. Not empty of people, just empty of presence. The pressure was gone. The cold, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, all lifted, and the front door creaked open. None of them spoke as they stepped outside. The night was clear, peaceful, as if none of it had happened. They never found Lena. Aaron never saw her again. He asked Zach, and Zach swore she wasn't anyone he'd invited, thought she was someone Aaron had known. He moved out a week later, didn't care about the lease, the deposit, nothing, just left. A few months after, he saw a news article online. The house had gone back on the market. The listing had one photo, the outside of the home, bright and inviting. But if you looked closely in the window of the upstairs bathroom, you could see a woman's face, pale, wet, smiling. Story the end.
Story number 4.
We were never the type to throw big house parties, but when my friend Chris suggested we host one at his aunt's old house for the end of semester celebration, no one could resist. The house had been sitting empty for years, but that was the whole appeal. It was the perfect place to throw a party, isolated, far from any neighbors, and full of character, or so we thought. None of us knew much about the house's history other than that it belonged to Chris's late aunt, who had passed away unexpectedly a year ago. The place had been left untouched since her passing, except for a few times when Chris's family had come to check on it. The house was big, eerie, and filled with the kind of old charm that only time could provide. The worn wood floors creaked under every step, and the windows were cracked with years of neglect. The air inside had that dusty, stale smell of a house that had seen too many years without the warmth of a family. Still, Chris convinced everyone it would be the perfect spot for a party. We were all eager to unwind before the stress of finals hit, and we were tired of the same old venues. By the time Friday rolled around, everyone had agreed to come. Chris and I spent the afternoon setting up, stringing up some old Christmas lights around the living room, moving furniture to create a makeshift dance floor, and bringing in enough beer and snacks to keep everyone happy for the night. We weren't concerned about the house's age or the odd sense of emptiness that lingered in the corners. The plan was simple: music, dancing, and just letting loose. The party started at around 8. By 9, the house was full of people. Most of us were old friends, but there were a few stragglers, people who knew Chris or had just heard about the party through word of mouth. I didn't know most of them, but that was fine. Everyone was there to have fun. The music was blasting, people were dancing, and the drinks were flowing. But from the beginning, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the house seemed to whisper at odd moments, the faint creaks in the floorboards or the faint sound of something moving when no one else was there. It wasn't enough to make anyone stop partying, though. We were all too caught up in the chaos of the night. It wasn't until later that things began to change. Around midnight, the energy shifted. The music began to sound distant, muffled, like it was coming from somewhere far away. The air in the house felt heavier, colder, and despite the fact that we were all sweating from dancing, the chill crept up my spine. I brushed it off as being tired, maybe a little too much booze. But as I walked into the kitchen to grab another drink, I saw something in the corner of the room that made my heart skip a beat. It was a figure, a shadow standing perfectly still in the dark corner of the kitchen. At first, I thought it was someone in a dark hoodie or a jacket, but the shape was wrong. It was too tall, too wide, as though it was stretching unnaturally. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, convinced it was just the result of too much alcohol, but when I looked again, it was still there. I shook my head and walked past it, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just the shadows playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't shake it. When I returned to the living room, Chris was standing by the door, talking to a few people. I caught his eye, and without a word, he excused himself from the conversation and walked over to me. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I just thought I saw something in the kitchen," I replied, my voice low, almost embarrassed. Chris raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Just a shadow," I said, trying to shrug it off. "I don't know. It's probably nothing." Chris didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the matter. He just gave me a tight smile and moved toward the speakers to turn the music up again. The party continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every now and then I would catch glimpses of strange movement at the edges of my vision, always in the corners or along the walls. It was like the house itself was alive, shifting, watching. Around 1 a.m, things took a turn for the worse. The power cut out completely. The music stopped, the lights flickered, and then went black. The sudden silence was deafening. Everyone stood still, unsure of what to do. Some people laughed nervously, while others fumbled for their phones, trying to use the flashlight. "That's weird," Chris muttered. "The power shouldn't be out. I checked everything before the party." We all moved into the hallway, where the windows let in some light from the moon, but it wasn't much. People started to grumble, some heading for the front door to leave. But when I looked at the door, it was clear it wouldn't open. "Hey, what the hell?" someone shouted from near the front entrance. "The door's stuck." Chris tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. He pushed harder, but the door stayed shut. "It's locked," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't know how that happened." I glanced at the window by the door, which was still intact. The heavy curtains that were usually drawn were now fluttering lightly in the breeze, as though something or someone had been moving them. It didn't feel right. "Okay, this is weird," I said, feeling uneasy. "All right, everyone. Chill," Chris said. "I'll go check the fuse box. It'll be fine." But just as he started to walk down the hallway, we heard it. A loud thud, followed by another, then a third. It came from above us, from the floor above. Everyone froze. That's not normal," Tasha, one of the girls at the party, said. She looked more shaken than anyone else. The thuds continued, heavy and deliberate, as though someone was pacing back and forth in the room above. Chris turned, face pale. "It's probably just the house settling," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. I started to feel that familiar unease crawling up my spine again. "You sure? I'll go check it out," he said. But before he could take another step, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or worse, had been thrown across the room. "Okay, that's it," I said. "I'm going with you." I wasn't sure what made me say it, but something deep down told me that whatever was going on, it wasn't just some freak accident. Chris didn't protest. He led the way, flashlight in hand. The rest of us followed, nervous whispers trailing behind us. Upstairs was even darker than downstairs, the faint moonlight coming through the narrow windows, offering only enough light to make out shapes. We stood at the top of the stairs, staring down the long hallway. The door to the first room on the left stood ajar. I heard something. Scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the other side. Without a word, Chris walked over and pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the floor was covered in shattered glass, the remnants of what appeared to be a broken picture frame. The smell in the air was sharp, metallic, like old iron. "Jesus, what happened here?" Chris muttered. "I don't know," I said, backing away from the mess on the floor. The scratching noise continued, growing louder, coming from deeper within the house. It was a constant dragging, as though someone was slowly moving their feet across the wooden floorboards. Without thinking, I moved toward the source of the sound. It led me down the hallway to the attic door. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to be pulling me toward it like an invisible force. The door was partially open, the stairs leading up into total darkness. "Don't go up there," Chris said, his voice barely a whisper. But it was too late. I reached for the door and pushed it open, the air inside thick and cold. It smelled stale, like dust, but there was something else, something rotten. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended slowly, carefully. The attic was large, filled with boxes and old furniture covered in white sheets. But what caught my attention wasn't the dust or the clutter. It was the figure standing in the corner. A woman. Tall, gaunt, with long, unkempt hair hanging over her face. Her clothes were tattered, as though they hadn't been touched in decades. I froze, staring at her. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe. And then she looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow, empty, like two dark pits. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly there was a crash behind me. The door slammed shut. I spun around, only to find the others behind me, their faces pale and wide-eyed. "She's gone," Tasha whispered. The figure was gone, and the attic was empty again. That's when everything hit the fan. The house began to shake. It wasn't violent at first, but it grew stronger, like something was trying to break free from within. The lights flickered again, and the windows rattled in their frames. Then came the screams. They weren't from any of us. We ran down the stairs, but the front door was still locked, the windows still sealed shut. We didn't leave until the sun came up. By then, the house had stopped shaking. but the feeling of something lingering was still there. The door opened easily when Chris tried it again, and we rushed out, stumbling into the cold morning air. None of us spoke much after that. We drove home in silence, shaken to the core. No one wanted to go back to the house, not even to pick up our things. Chris didn't mention the party again, and none of us ever talked about what we saw in that attic. But I know it wasn't just our imagination. The house wanted us to leave. And for some of us, we never stopped feeling its presence. Story. The end.
Story number 5.
It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My friend Kat had invited a few of us over to her place just outside of town. She'd recently moved into this older 2-story house she was renting with 2 other girls she'd met on a housing forum. They weren't around that weekend. One was at her boyfriend's place in another city, and the other was visiting family. Kat figured it was the perfect opportunity to have a small get-together. Nothing big. Just 6 of us. Some drinks, some music, a chance to unwind. The house was one of those odd, early 1900s builds with too many doors and narrow hallways that didn't seem to lead anywhere logical. The walls were painted that flat, dull off-white, and the floors creaked constantly, even when no one was walking. Still, it had character. I remember thinking it felt lived in, almost like the house had a presence of its own. By the time I arrived, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, casting long, shaky shadows over the front porch. A couple of the others were already there: Emily, Sam, and Jordan. Kat greeted me at the door with a drink in hand and that familiar spark in her eye. Inside, she had a playlist going, dim lighting, and candles set around the living room and kitchen. She said the overhead lights were too aggressively bright, and honestly, I agreed. The vibe was chill. We were sitting around, laughing, passing drinks back and forth, when someone, might have been Jordan, asked if anyone had ever felt weird in the house. You know, just one of those throwaway questions that come out after a few beers. Kat paused and gave a short laugh, like she didn't want to admit something but couldn't help herself. Okay, so don't freak out, she said, tucking her legs beneath her on the couch. But yeah, this place is weird. Like, really weird. We all leaned in a bit. Kat told us how sometimes she'd hear footsteps on the stairs when she was the only one home. Not the house-settling kind, but actual, steady, deliberate steps. She'd also hear what sounded like someone whispering in the upstairs hallway, especially late at night. I thought it was the pipes, she said, but then it happened while I was in the hallway, and it sounded like it was right behind me. I turned around, and no one was there. Emily shuddered. That's so messed up. We all agreed, but of course we were buzzed, so it turned into a challenge. Jordan said we should go full-on ghost hunters for the night. Nothing serious, just fun. A stupid game. We ended up grabbing a couple of candles and heading upstairs to explore. The second floor had a long, narrow hallway with 3 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom. One of the rooms, Kat explained, belonged to a girl named Riley, the one who was out of town. Kat hesitated a little before pushing open Riley's door. She hates people going in her room, just so you know, Kat said, but we all stepped in anyway, because that's what people do in horror stories. We make the dumb choices. Riley's room was the only one with blackout curtains, which made it darker than the rest of the house. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books. She had these shelves filled with crystals, jars of herbs, dried flowers, witchy stuff, basically. On her nightstand sat a leather-bound journal and an old Polaroid camera. Sam picked up the camera and joked, "Maybe we'll catch a ghost on film." He snapped a picture of the room. We waited for the print to slide out and develop, all leaning in around it. When the image came into focus, we all froze. In the photo, there was a figure standing by the closet door. At first, we thought it was just one of us who had moved, or maybe a weird lighting trick. But the figure was too tall, too distorted. Its limbs were stretched, blurred at the edges, and its head was turned at an impossible angle, like it had twisted all the way around. Kat grabbed the photo and stared at it, her hands trembling. No way. That's not real. Sam looked genuinely shaken. I swear I didn't touch anything. I just pointed and shot. Delete it, Emily whispered, even though it was a Polaroid. Jordan snorted. You can't delete a Polaroid. Genius. We left the room. Back downstairs, the mood had shifted. No one said it out loud, but we were all rattled. We turned the music back on, tried to laugh it off, poured more drinks. Kat threw the photo in a drawer in the kitchen, out of sight. It was almost midnight when the power cut out. 1 second we had music and laughter, the next we were in pitch black silence, the only light coming from the dying candles. "Are you kidding me?" Kat said, voice tight. "I paid the electric bill." Emily pulled out her phone to turn on the flashlight, but her screen stayed black. "My phone just died. I had like 60% a second ago." Jordan checked his. Dead. Sam's too. Mine was the only one still working, but even it had dropped from 80 to 10% within minutes. We used it to light our way as Kat checked the fuse box in the basement. The basement was one of those old stone-walled dungeons with exposed beams and a smell like wet earth. As we descended, the air got noticeably colder. Kat opened the fuse box. Everything looked fine. She flipped the main switch off, then on again. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. "Maybe it's the grid?" I offered, though it didn't explain the phones. We went back upstairs and decided to just call it a night. It didn't feel fun anymore. We'd had too much to drink, everyone was on edge, and we figured maybe we'd just wake up to everything being normal again. Kat offered to let us sleep over. She had a pull-out couch, and we threw some blankets on the floor. Everyone was too spooked to go upstairs again, so we made a weird little sleepover fort in the living room. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to someone whispering my name. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was still pitch dark. I thought maybe it was Kat or Emily needing something, but when I looked around, everyone was still asleep. Then I heard it again, just behind me, a voice, clear as day. "Come upstairs." It was a woman's voice, soft, low, hypnotic. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. I lay back down, telling myself it was a dream, just a half-asleep hallucination. But then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. They stopped just at the bottom step, maybe 10 feet away. I sat up again, straining to see through the darkness. That's when I noticed the candles. We'd blown them all out earlier before going to bed. I was sure of it, but now one of them, the one on the kitchen counter, was lit. The tiny flame flickered violently, even though there was no wind. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight again. It barely lasted a second before the battery drained completely and the screen went dark. That's when I saw her. A woman standing just beyond the reach of the candlelight. She was tall, thin, and completely still. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes, if you could call them that, were just black holes. Empty sockets. She smiled at me, and then she was gone. I don't remember falling asleep again, but I must have passed out from sheer fear. When I woke up, the sun was rising, and everything looked normal. The power was back. Phones were charging. The candle was out. I didn't say anything at first. Maybe I dreamed it all. Maybe I just let the story and the photo and the house get to me. But then Kat came over and looking pale. "Did anyone go in Riley's room last night?" she asked. We all said no, not after what happened. Kat nodded slowly. "I went in there this morning to check something, and the Polaroid picture, it's back on her nightstand." We all looked at each other. None of us had moved it. That's when Jordan stood up. "Okay, that's it. I'm leaving." One by one, we all packed our things. Kat didn't ask us to stay. I think she was just as shaken as we were. A few days later, Kat texted me. She said Riley came home and asked why someone had been in her room. When Kat asked what she meant, Riley said, "I found my camera on the bed. And this." It was a new photo. Same closet, same angle, but now the figure was closer. Right in front of the lens. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The house was an old craftsman tucked deep into a residential neighborhood in Pasadena, surrounded by thick hedges and giant oaks that creaked even when the wind wasn't blowing. It had been unoccupied for over a year since the last owners, a retired couple, moved to Arizona. It wasn't abandoned exactly. The lawn was trimmed every now and then by a service, and a realtor occasionally came by to open it up for viewings, but no one had lived in it for months. Tasha found the listing on a private site where people posted unlisted homes for rent, often as venues for events that required privacy. The kind of privacy that came with big porches, long driveways, and neighbors who minded their business. She needed a place to throw her 25th birthday party, and everything about the house was perfect. The space, the isolation, the fact that it was technically an escrow, but between owners, so no one would be stopping by to check up on it. She Venmo'd half the deposit to a guy named Derek. who swore he worked for the agency handling the property. And a few days later, she had a key in her mailbox. Saturday night rolled around, and by 8 p.m., people were already showing up. Music thumped through the windows, and lights blinked from inside. Multicolored bulbs Tasha's cousins strung along the living room ceiling. Everyone was either holding a red cup or a vape pen, laughing, shouting over the music, leaning into one another as the house filled with the buzz of energy only strangers and friends in a foreign space could generate. By 10 p.m., there were at least 40 people. Someone had turned the back sunroom into a makeshift dance floor, and a DJ set up shop next to the fireplace with a small table and portable speakers. The air reeked of weed and spilled tequila. Tasha floated through the crowd, accepting compliments on the venue like she owned it. The weirdness didn't start until around 10:30, when a girl named Maya came out of the upstairs bathroom with her lipstick smeared and her hands shaking. Tasha was in the hallway when she saw her. "Hey," Tasha said, laughing a little. "You good?" Maya nodded too quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. You look like you saw a ghost." "I think I did." Tasha tilted her head, still grinning. Maya's voice dropped. "There was someone in the mirror, but not like behind me, in it. I turned around, but no one was there. When I looked back, she was gone." Tasha blinked at her. "Are you high?" "Just a little." Maya rubbed her arms. "But I'm serious. She looked right at me." They both stood silently for a second. Then Tasha shrugged it off, forcing a laugh. "This place creepy. I'll give you that." Maya didn't laugh. Word about the mirror spread within the next hour. More people went upstairs, curious to see it. A few joked about Bloody Mary. One guy dared his friend to stare into the mirror for 5 full minutes alone. Everyone was drinking, the music was loud, and the house absorbed the energy like dry wood. Then someone screamed. It came from upstairs, and it was sharp enough to cut through the bass. People turned, some laughed nervously, thinking it was a prank. But when the girl who screamed came running down the stairs, crying, the mood changed. "I saw her," she sobbed. "She was standing in the tub. Tasha tried to calm her down, but the girl, someone's friend named Chloe, was hysterical. She was babbling about a woman in a soaked nightgown, her mouth open in a silent scream, eyes all black. Tasha made her way upstairs with 2 of her friends. The bathroom was empty, the tub dry, the mirror unremarkable. Still, something about it made her uneasy. The party dipped after that. People kept drinking, but the buzz had worn off. Whispers swirled like cigarette smoke. The upstairs was empty now. Everyone stayed downstairs, sticking to groups, not letting themselves drift too far from the main room. Around midnight, the power flickered. Just for a moment, the lights dimmed and came back. The music hiccuped. "Old house," someone muttered, but then it happened again. And again. 3 quick pulses. The DJ looked up, uneasy. "Yo, we blowing a fuse?" Tasha went into the kitchen to check the panel in the hallway. It looked fine. Nothing was tripped. She touched the wall near the panel and drew her hand back quickly. It was cold. Freezing, actually. The wall itself felt like it had been sitting in ice. She called for Rob, her friend who knew a thing or two about houses. He touched the same spot and frowned. "It's like weirdly cold. That's not normal, right?" "No, shouldn't be." Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door, not on the back, from inside the house. The living room fell silent. People stopped talking. The music had cut again during the last flicker. No one was moving. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Someone laughed nervously. "Is there a basement?" "There is," Rob said, face tightening. They opened the basement door. It was pitch black. Rob turned on the flashlight from his phone and started down the creaking wooden steps. The smell hit first. Wet, earthy, mildewed. He stepped down slowly, the beam sweeping the room, cardboard boxes, an old rocking chair, a washing machine. And then in the far corner, he saw her. A woman. Pale skin, hair hanging over her face, barefoot, wet. He stopped breathing. She didn't move. "Rob?" Tasha called from the top of the stairs. The flashlight trembled in his grip. "There's someone down here." She was gone in a blink. Just gone. Like she'd never been there. He ran up the stairs so fast he tripped, scraping his shin. He slammed the basement door and twisted the lock. There was someone in the basement, he panted. She was just standing there, soaking wet. They all stood frozen. A girl near the window started crying. People began leaving. Some rushed out in groups, others trickled one by one. By 1 a.m., Only 10 people remained, mostly close friends who didn't want to leave Tasha to clean up or deal with whatever the hell was happening alone. Then, one by one, they started seeing her. Reflections in windows, a brief flicker at the edge of a mirror, a face in the dark pane of the microwave door. Every time someone looked directly, she'd vanish, but not before locking eyes. Tasha kept telling herself it was some shared hallucination, power of suggestion, fear feeding itself. Until her phone rang, she looked down. It said, "Unknown caller." She answered it anyway, despite her better judgment. "Hello?" At first, nothing, just static. Then, faint, garbled, came a woman's voice. "He drowned me." Tasha's blood turned to ice. She hung up, threw the phone across the room. It clattered to the floor, screen cracking. Rob picked it up and handed it to her, wide-eyed. "What was that?" "I don't know," she said. "Some woman said she drowned." "No," she said, "he drowned her. They didn't sleep that night. By morning, they were gone." Everyone packed up. Tasha cleaned the place as best she could, locked the doors, dropped the key in the mailbox like Derek told her to. She never heard from him again. His number stopped working. The listing vanished from the site. When she called the real estate company, they told her no one named Derek worked there, and the house had been vacant since the owners passed away last year. "Passed away?" she repeated. "Tragic accident," the receptionist said. "Couple drowned. They found the husband in the bathtub like he'd had a seizure. The wife was in the basement. She fell, apparently, but there were signs she tried to crawl up the stairs. Weird case. It's in probate now." Tasha felt her throat tighten. "They drowned?" "Yes. Why?" She hung up without answering. Weeks passed. She tried to forget, but at night she would hear things in her own apartment. The knock. That same slow, deliberate rhythm. Sometimes it came from her closet. Other times, her bathroom. Once it came from under her bed. She moved a month later. None of her friends would talk about the party. They avoided it like trauma, like something they'd all quietly agreed to forget. But sometimes, when Tasha walked past mirrors, she swore she saw water dripping down the glass. Just for a second. And every now and then, her phone would ring. Unknown caller. She stopped answering. But the last time it happened, curiosity got the better of her. She picked up. There was no static this time, only a whisper. "I'm still down here." Story, the end.